Hi, I'm Sarah Gabriel, former special education teacher turned social entrepreneur and founder of In Good Company. We help businesses build thriving teams by giving them the confidence and tools to effectively lead employees with disabilities. This podcast is for leaders creating interability workplaces. Together, we'll dig into what it takes to lead with both heart and business savvy and build workplaces where contributors of all abilities are not just included, but essential. Welcome to In Good Company. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Tom Derry to the show, a passionate entrepreneur, advocate, and change maker. He is the co-founder of Rising Tide Car Wash and the author of Power of Potential, How a Non-Traditional Workforce Can Lead You to Run Your Business Better. In this book, Tom shares the powerful story behind the Rising Tide Car Wash, which employs individuals with autism and proves the importance of systems that allow everyone to thrive. Tom is also the founder of Rising Tide U, an organization dedicated to helping other businesses build inclusive, mission-driven models. There's so much more I could say, but I think I'm just going to pass it off to you, Tom, and let you do the talking and you tell the story yourself. Welcome to the show today. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really am excited to be here with you today and happy to hopefully provide some value to your audience.
I think you will. For starters, some of our audience members may not know you. The Rising Tide Car Wash story is, I think, one of the most encouraging, empowering stories out there for disability employment. But for those who haven't heard your story, could you just start from the beginning and tell us what you built, why, and how?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2011, my dad was really concerned about my brother Andrew's future, and Andrew's on the autism spectrum. And it was pretty clear pretty quickly that in order for him to lead the full adult life that we knew he was capable of, we were going to have to take action. There weren't a lot of, at that time, there were really very few examples of successful organizations, and there weren't, maybe one or two programmatic disability hiring programs within larger organizations like Walgreens, TIA, CREF. Not a lot of examples, and none in Long Island where we were based at that time. And my dad had been an entrepreneur at that point for his whole, a large portion of his career, like 30 years. And I had just finished my undergraduate business degree, and I wanted to do something in the social impact space. So it seemed like a natural fit for me. And, my dad was all in. He sold his business at the time in February 2012, and we got really to work. In May of 2012, we launched a proof of concept, so like a small pilot program at an existing car wash in the summer of 2012, and really just trying to work out our key assumptions, which were, can we find enough people with autism that can meet industry standards to do this work? And will customers look favorably upon this mission? So, we did a bunch of different tests and tried to build some studies within the pilot to validate or invalidate those ideas. And we got great results. We were able to build a good recruitment system through that pilot. We were able to essentially, I think 70% of the individuals who went through the training program passed. And then when we, so that means they met the industry standards. And then when we started we did like a lot of intercept interviews with customers, and that was overwhelmingly positive. People were overwhelmingly positive about the ideas. That gave us enough confidence to go and buy an actual car wash. So we bought one in Parkland, Florida, the end of 2012. We renovated it, put in our operating model, and relaunched in April of 2013. And really tough early on, not so much having to do with managing our team, but just learning how to run this type of business and learning how to do it effectively. So that was a big learning curve, probably about a year or two. And then we felt confident that that business was starting to do well, that first location. And we had enough equity in that store because it appreciated, because we had started to make it do really well, to build another car wash in the same area in Broward County, Florida. And that one kind of took off hot and has been really successful ever since. And now we built a third one in Coral Springs, and next year we'll be building a fourth one in Pompano Beach. So all in in South Florida. So today we have about 90 employees with autism, which makes up about 80% of our staff. And by next year, we'll be well over 100.
What a story. And Tom, I love how you outline it. There's kind of a formula that you followed. There's a process, and I can tell based on your dad's experience in entrepreneurship and your business training, I can see so clearly how that methodology and that thinking and that intentionality is infused in the desire and commitment to having a social impact. And you've strengthened your ability to see impact as a result because you've structured it in this way.
Yeah, yeah. I think we approached it a little bit differently than a lot of folks do because my dad, it has been he was a successful entrepreneur for a while at this point, and so he has an entrepreneur, a seasoned entrepreneur's viewpoint. And at this point, early on, I was like along for the ride. I was doing all the research and the legwork, but my strategy skills at that point were not good. As much as I think most 22-year-olds might say that's not true, but as you look back, they were not so seasoned at that point. So he knew that like we had things we needed to test. Right, this is like something different. And he knew that he wanted to find a really good business model that Andrew could work in instead of trying to find a business that Andrew necessarily was going to like love the technical work that was associated with it. Because he's looking at this as like, hey, this is Andrew. This needs to carry Andrew past my lifespan. So inherently, the most important thing is that it's a sustainable business model. We got to figure out how to build rich work experiences within that business model. And so we looked at like a lot of things that we thought Andrew could do that looked like viable businesses. We looked at delis, smoothies, dry cleaning, and car washing, obviously. And we really liked car washing, honestly, because not only was it process driven, and so we thought Andrew could do the work and it employed a lot of people, but because it was a hard asset, right? So we were buying a business that if it all blew up and we didn't, we weren't successful, there was still an asset that we could sell back, right? So from a financial perspective, it made sense to do it that way. And that was really like that was very much a business first and still has been a business first methodology. And that I think is, if there's probably the most important reason why we've been successful.
Yeah. I mean, listeners, if you have not checked out Tom's book, he outlines a lot of this in the book, and it's practical. Obviously it's inspiring, but it's got the backbone to really stand up on its own. And I really admire that about the thoughtfulness and the patient, tireless testing that you guys went through, like you said, to prove out your hypothesis or prove it wrong. You were willing to be proven wrong. And, you guys are very honest in the book about talking about what you tried, what failed, and out of those failures came key learnings that made you guys stronger in the way that you train and develop process. So let's talk about your book for a minute, because we still will be talking about the car wash because the book is about the car wash and what you guys have learned in management. If I can, Tom, I'd love to start out by just reading a quote from the book. Just to start the conversation, you said, "We didn't start Rising Tide to be a charity. We started it to prove that people with autism can be some of the best employees in the world if you build a system that allows them to thrive." So talk to us about the system that you realized you needed to create for real work to be done and real individuals to be supported in doing their best work.
Yeah. So, it started with a design constraint that we put front and center, right? Which was that 80% at least of our staff would be on the autism spectrum. And that was a number that we chose because we wanted the business to really be built around our team members with autism. And the concept was that you can't marginalize 80% of your staff. So you have to design for them in that with that constraint in mind, right? And anybody who's studied design or understands some design principles recognizes that constraint generally is what breeds innovation, whether it be budgetary constraint or in this case a hiring mandate. And so with that in mind, it forced us at every step of the way to really listen and observe our team, right? So some of our team members are not going to verbally tell us why they're struggling. Some of them are going to verbally tell us very much about why they're struggling, but it's not everyone. And so what we learned early on was that when someone was struggling, this was the opportunity for us to redesign the system for that person with that person in mind. And that approach really is what has defined us. Frankly, it's been a brick by brick process. It wasn't like we just designed it right the first time. It was we got one process right the first time and everything else was terrible. And then we got a second process and a third and a fourth. But it came from, hey, Johnny is struggling right now. He's just not making time. His quality is no good. He looks super stressed and like almost checked out. Like, what's going on? And then it was okay. What's like, when we give him a little bit more structure, he starts to improve, right? When we give him a time box, he starts to improve, and so on and so forth. And we kind of learned these like fundamental design principles that then we've scaled to. We try to scale to every aspect of the business, and that's
Yeah.
essentially clarity, consistency, and coaching, and so it's all based around the idea that the manager's job and the leader's job is to replace ambiguity with clarity, right? So that then there's a lot of different tools that you can use to do that, which I'm happy to talk through, but that's the underlying concept that makes it work.
Yeah. Tom, I would love for you to talk through an example, maybe using one of the stories in your book. But before you do, I want to bring up one more concept that I think is relevant to what we're talking about right now. And you wrote about it in the book, The Extreme User. You were talking about things like clarity, removing ambiguity. Those constructs benefit all of us. All of us need clarity in our jobs. Some of us pick up vague instructions and fill in the gaps of like things that are missing in your instruction. Like, oh, he didn't say this, but I know he probably meant also wash my hands before making this sandwich if I'm working in a deli. So when you're giving us an example of a process that you had to rethink in how you trained your team members, because you have a process even for developing your training process. Tell us a story and then tell us why it matters to think about extreme users in your case and how that's transferable to the rest of us. That's a loaded question, but I think
Yeah,
it's a good
no,
one.
it's great. So extreme users, this is another design principle, right? And this is a widely recognized design principle that so essentially you want to find the people who put the most stress on any system. And that's the person that you design around. Theoretically, if you design around the person with that in mind, you build a system that works better for everybody, right? So you're looking at like the tails of the bell curve when you're trying to identify your extreme users. And organizationally, the way that shows up is the person who's struggling the most, right? And that's usually pretty easy to identify. So with that in mind, I mean, there's myriad examples from our business of how we've done that, but one of the ones that we use in the book that people tend to really like is the example of Luco, who was he was a supervisor for us, and he was really struggling with closing the cash at night. So virtually any business that has cash has some errors in their closing processes, right? So that doesn't mean necessarily someone's stealing. It just means that the way that the POS system, the point of sale system says it should, the amount of money we should have, it's off by a couple bucks, right? And in our case, Uco, so generally speaking, we were having these errors about 34% of the time. And Luco was more than that. He was more than average when it came to how frequently he was making errors. And so it was like, all right, let's sit and observe and watch Luco. Because if you talk to Luco, he was a little defensive. He didn't think there was any problem. Like he thought he had a good system and it was working fine. And, didn't want to really accept that there was anything wrong. And that was okay. I mean, look, sometimes that's how people are going to respond when you're saying something's not going well, even in a safe environment, right? But then the approach that we took was, okay, we're going to sit and observe and watch him close the money at least once. Maybe he's going to take a couple times, who knows? And we watched. And it became pretty evident that it was an organizational issue. Like we've got these different registers, essentially three different registers that we're collecting money in. And he's taking the money out and he's putting it together and it's all one big pile and it's like just a confusing mess. And then once he organizes it and says, okay, well, this is the bank. So the cash that we're depositing to the bank, the extra cash that we accumulated over the day. If that number is not right, like his ability to find the problem is not there. You're not gonna be able to do it. because it was messy the way that he got there. So the first step was, okay, like let's just create a sorting tool. It's like this stack of money goes here, this goes here, this goes here. Luca was initially hesitant to want to listen, and that was okay. But we worked through it with him. We gave him a prototype. He tore it apart, hated it. We gave him another prototype. We took in some of his feedback and some around like dimensionality and like some things he wanted to see on the board as far as like what places he could write in the number of each type of bill he had. And then we did it again. He liked it. And then from there, it was like, okay, like let's put some basic equations on here, and let's also like build a little calculator that we can put on the computer, so he just has to punch in the number of bills and it's going to calculate everything for him. And lo and behold, he stopped having errors, right? It's working for him. We scale it across the team and we rerun the numbers, and we went from that 34% error rate to down to 4% error rate.
Wow.
And beyond that's like, that's awesome. But it also used to be like a 2-week training process to get someone to be able to close the money effectively. It changed that to 2 days. And so it had a huge impact on training. It went from being something that like everybody hated to teach new people because it was so time consuming, to something that now it's like, all right, yeah, he's going to learn to close cash tonight. Like no big deal. He's going to go through the training. We're going to do, a one in-person check-in, and probably he's going to have it down after that. If not, maybe it's 1 or 2 more times, even if the person has really, really basic math skills too. So, that's the power of doing it, right? You not only made this person feel like they're not in trouble, but they're actually a collaborator in fixing the problem, but you cascaded that to materially improving the system and making it much more efficient, which leads to a more resilient system, right? Because now if somebody quits, it's not 2 weeks to train a new person to do this process. It's 2 days, and it's not a big deal anymore, right?
Did you know there are nearly 200 small businesses in the U.S. who are on a mission to employ individuals with disabilities, and we want to send shoppers their way? That's where you come in. Join the In Good Company Passport game and support businesses that are moving the needle for disability employment. Here's how you play. Choose 3 businesses featured on our passport, snap photos with each visit or online purchase, and share them on your Instagram. Tag IGC with us and the business you supported, and we'll send you a prize. Grab your passport and instructions in the show notes or on our Instagram page today. Yeah. So, Tom, you're actually hitting on the next question I was going to ask you, which is, if a manager is out there listening, whether they are leading at a business that is by design, employing a higher percentage of employees with disabilities, or maybe a more typical workplace where they might have one known employee with a disability or maybe even none, I think the question they would be asking is, why should I take the time to revisit how I train? This feels like a heavy lift. I know what you're saying, Tom, but you're different because this is your thing. I have a training manual to follow. I've got a million other things to do. Why should I revisit my training?
Yeah. So I think I hear that. And like every manager has a whirlwind of tasks that they have to do. So for them to carve out time to redesign a system feels very overwhelming. So I would say, the right way to do it is that the organizational leaders take that on, or at least create runway for that manager to have time to work on this. But if that's not there, it's still an effective use of time for that manager to just create some basic improvements, right? Maybe they can't totally throw the system away that is in the training manual, but they could take some pictures. They could take some videos. They can just lay out a checklist, right, that the person can utilize, right? And very often, just that initial prototype, that intent, right, that the manager is making an effort to help this team member who is struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It changes the dynamic of the manager and their team, right? Because now the team doesn't feel like they're going to get beat over the head with something when they don't do it right. They're going to be looked at like, okay, like he's going to listen and try to learn from me, and he might actually make it a little better or help me in any way that he can. And then that not only, right, so it's like that helps that person and it helps the safety on that team. So there's immediate, even if the prototype that they build isn't very good, right, there's an immediate cultural impact that manager is going to have with their team. And I think every manager wants their team to know that they care, right? Like that's a fundamental part of being a good manager. And then as they build that skill, they will make it easier to replace team members. So especially in frontline work, very high turnover rates, right? We have 20% annual turnover. Our industry is like 120%, but still 20% turnover is something, right? We are turning people over. And it would be a lot of stress for our managers if they didn't have efficient ways to teach new people these skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think the number one thing after, so the number two thing after the cultural impact is the resilience that it builds in the organization, because so many companies, even big companies, they rely on somebody who has like a lot of experience, or they hire somebody who has experience in their industry because that makes it easier to bring them on board. But that ends up so frequently, that ends up being a problem in the long run, because A, you're now dependent on someone. Really tough to be dependent on someone when you're trying to scale an organization, because people do move on. And B, often you'll blur why you're hiring someone, because you've got this like incentive to hire someone that just has the skills, so I can just bring them on quick, even if they're not a good culture fit. And it's, hiring someone that shares the values of the organization. That's the thing, right? That's what actually makes teams perform well. And when you don't have to make that trade-off between that values fit and a skill fit, because you can teach them everything they need to know effectively, you end up building a much, much healthier team.
Yeah. And business leaders, I'm sure you get this question as well. I get it all the time. What's the return on investment? If I spend time learning how to do this now, that's going to slow me down. I'm, sometimes investing in the overtime I'm going to pay my manager or pay you in good company to come and teach me how to do this. Like, how is that going to, because I think there's this perception still that this is charitable. Why should I slow down to hire people that aren't going to come up to speed? I hate to even say that out loud, but that is the perception a lot of times.
Yeah.
But what I hear you saying is, when you take the time to invest in stronger training systems, clearer processes, the result is, I'll let you fill in the blank there. What is the
Yeah.
ROI for all of
So
this?
it's a cascading effect, right? So the most direct effect is increased retention and increased, broadened talent pool, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't have to say necessarily that we're going to hire people with autism,
Mm-hmm.
but now you can peel away a level of necessary experience.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying I need someone who has 3 years experience in my industry, we can say I don't need any of that. Anybody who has this value set, I can hire, right? So it goes from a narrow, generally heavily recruited group of people to a broad group of people that, in the case of many individuals with autism, are eager but not getting the opportunity, right? So that is right away. So whenever I talk to employers about this stuff, I say find the role that has the highest turn, the one that you are having the most difficulty keeping butts in seats on, and start there, because you'll see the return immediately with that. And then you have all these other benefits of increased psychological safety, increased scalability in your systems, increased resilience in your systems, more efficient generally, so faster, which is very important for most organizations. And then if you did decide you were going to make a meaningful push to employ people that have employment barriers, whether that be autism or something else, customers really care about that, right? So that's a story that differentiates you in the market,
Yeah.
especially when you do it authentically and you do it at scale, and you can. Yeah, it's funny, we started doing like employee spotlight interviews just super recently, actually, because we want to get those stories out to our members more frequently. And when we sat down, we're like, okay, like, whose story do we want to tell? We've got 50, 60 stories that like would be awesome to tell. They're all different, right? And so that's content there's a lot of content. We'll parse it out as far as getting it out to the public. You end up with these human stories that drive buying decisions for not every customer, but a lot, enough for
Yeah.
it to be relevant.
And the market is changing. We've been tracking the rising number of shoppers, millennials and below, and our generation cares about, like, we want to put our dollars towards meaningful
Yeah,
things like that. And we want to go work at companies that hold these values. We
yeah.
would trade off a higher paycheck, many of us, for a company. I heard someone say one time, impact is a currency to me, meaning
Mm,
I find it valuable and rewarding to know that my work is contributing to, again, not just something charitable, but something meaningful and impactful that's done well and intentionally.
Yeah, and it's our generation's BS meter is much more fine-tuned on these issues than so there's this like there's so many groups now that utilize it just for the marketing, right? And they don't see the results. Or maybe they see them short term, but eventually it comes back around.
I think the fact they all have over 50 stories, like you can make up a couple, you can scrape a couple by, but you can't make up 50 plus stories.
That's right. And that's the thing is that like from a when we're talking about like workforce impact strategies, they're very authentic, right? It's not like some number or some and I love, sustainability initiatives too, but it's not some number of trees in some far off place that like I have no idea if you do this or not, to be honest. It's hey, this is Carmelo. Before he came here, he struggled with social interactions, struggled making eye contact. He didn't feel like he was comfortable speaking to strangers. Today, he feels great about all of that. He's way more confident in his ability to talk to people, and the results speak for themselves. And we, can tell the story from there. But like that's a human that I've seen at that car wash, right? Like I recognize that person, right?
Yeah. And Tom, if you could tell another story, remind me, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but you tell a story in the book about how I think y'all got a customer complaint about the cleanliness. Maybe it was or maybe y'all just noticed the facilities weren't staying as clean, the guest bathrooms. And what was the finding there and the solution? Because I think there's a story about an employee who just totally ended up owning it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his name is Luke, and he was our first site cleaning specialist. So before Luke, we essentially like we operated the way we cleaned the store was called side work, right? So if you're familiar with the restaurant industry, that's a common term too. But it's like when there's nothing else to do, we do that, right?
Mhm.
So it's like by default, it's the last thing that we were doing. And when we got busy, that didn't go so well. And our number one, we're selling clean, right? That's what we sell as a product. So if the site is not clean, hard to sell clean in any other capacity. So it's really important. And so we decided, and my dad wanted us to have like a dedicated person to do this job, right? And they're going to clean the site. They're going to be, that was going to be their job in and day out. So we were like, looked at the team and was like, okay, well, like who do we think this would be good for? We came across Luke because Luke, super detail oriented, really wants to do a super thorough job. He kind of struggles with speed. And in the interior cleaning department, where we have to turn cars out fast because customers are waiting on them, he struggled with that aspect of that job a little bit. But we're like, this could like really fit his skill set well. So we worked directly with Luke. We came up with an initial prototype, which was terrible. And he was a champ for the way he helped us work through that prototype because it was clearly designed by someone who's never done that job before.
Yeah, which again highlights your value that you point out in the book of co-creating the process and testing it on the person that's actually going to be trained with it.
That's right. That's right. So we could have handed him this checklist that was designed in a nice air-conditioned office by someone who's never done the job before, and that was me. We could have just done that and said, here you go, Luke, do this every day. And instead we said, okay, this is like the prototype. We're going to walk and we're going to do the shift with you the first day. And we realized, well, that was a joke. That did not work at all. And we got through half that list and like this site is not even close to clean. So let's reevaluate the way that we deal with this. So some of that was different tools and some of it was different when we were going to do different things and then the frequency of which we were going to do different things. And we worked through it. It ended up taking like a week of this like being there, working, grinding it out with Luke. But by the end of it, we had a really good system. And Luke still does that job. That's probably like 8-9 years later.
So there's your ROI if you really want one out there, listener.
Yeah.
You invested a week refining the process and the training system, and you've got a detail-oriented, committed employee who's bringing excellent guest service. I always notice the bathroom when I'm in a place clean or dirty. Like you said, you're selling cleanliness. So what a value.
And not only that, right? So it's Luke. We got Luke, and he's been doing it for a long time. But we've got 6 other team members that are now in that role across the stores. And the stores are never dirty, right? So we go to commission meetings, and in fact we just had one recently for our new location, and the first thing the commissioner said, he's like, I go to your store in Margate and I'm always impressed with how clean it is. That's the first thing he said, because yeah, the store is clean all the time now.
Yeah.
And Luke is a big part of that.
Yeah, that makes me think, if you can't tell yet, I'm a big fan of the book. I will say it to anyone who will listen. Please go read this book. One of my other favorite quotes that I use often when I'm working with managers is really the case for process. You wrote in the book, process isn't the end, it's the means. The end is living the values and achieving the goals of the organization. So in this case, and in this story, your value is, of course, supporting your employees and giving them clarity so that they can do their job without frustration. It's also a value to provide an excellent guest experience, and you're a business that needs return customers, and you have a story to tell and you want to tell it with excellence. And so I'm thinking, my dad was a franchise owner. So growing up, I saw his property was excellent. He'd get really frustrated if he'd go down to a restaurant down the street that didn't uphold the same standards, because their work made people assume his work wasn't going to be a good experience. And so the importance of consistency, it would have been one thing to pat yourself on the back and say, all right, Luke is doing really great at this one location. But then you created, it kind of sounds like the Luke process. Like, you guys came up with a recipe that could be repeated even if that manager and Luke weren't there anymore. And the same high standard of excellence can now be replicated at your other properties. That's a whole nother level of excellence. And again, it's because you value these things that you put a process into place. So sometimes it can feel like you're pulling teeth to ask a manager to slow down and work on that process and iterate and consider, maybe I'm not explaining this thoroughly, but that's why.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, it is, I will say, for like the frontline and mid-level managers, I will say it's difficult to find the time to do. I'm not going to say that it's not. If I'm an organizational leader, like a C-suite or executive level leader, that to me is where, like, that's their job. Their job is to remove the barriers for their team to do excellent work. And that's, so like, myself and a few other key team members that we have, like, that is, we spend a disproportionate amount of time on that, improving systems, improving the business. That's what we're supposed to be working on, the business, while we have team members who work in the business, right? And that, it's, everybody has competing things to do, but I view that as, like, my most important job is to enable the teams on the floor that are helping the customers, who are paying our salaries, to do their job really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. Tom, one more story that I'm hoping you'll share, because I think it answers another question that comes up a lot with employers. There are a lot of conversations that kind of go like this when you're talking to an employer on why you should consider hiring a person with autism or another disability. And, the conversation will usually go, like you said, even, start with a role that's hard to keep filled. And I'll tell you how you can find the best person to fill that role and refine your process to support that person so that they can stay and do a good job and stay, long term. And we take that approach too. We say start with the entry level roles. There's a variety of tasks that can be done. You don't need a lot of experience to get started there. But sometimes the conversation, I would say a lot of times, the conversation and the assumptions can stop there. That this community is only suited for the entry level roles. I have it with me today, but there's a guy in the book that you write about who really wanted to be a manager, and he was one of your employees with autism. And like, I think the way the story went, in your heart of hearts, you wanted that for him too, but he wasn't cut out for it at the moment. So walk me through your thinking and how that story ended.
Yeah, so this was early. I think he was like 16 when he started with us at our first store, maybe a year into us opening. And he really struggled a lot in school. He was, like, really severely bullied. So he really wanted to, like, always show, like, that he could be great, and, like, just because he wanted to be accepted. I mean, truthfully, I think that was, like, the fundamental reason why he was so gung-ho to be a manager. And so it came from a good place, but, like, a wounded place, right? So it was something that he was, like, just super fixated on, getting to become a manager. And at this time, we didn't have nearly the process and structure and systems in place that we have now, and frankly that we needed to support him in that endeavor. So we'd often come to a head, and it'd be like he's doing other people's jobs or trying to take on way too much and then collapsing, or like dishing off problems when like he finally gets into the role and then he dishes it off because it got too stressful, right? Because frankly, he needed the structure of like, this is my job for the day. These are the things I need to do. Hey, if I need help, this is who I go to. Before I go to them, I try X, Y, and Z. And so what that led to, right? So was a first iteration of what we call our daily planning board, which has had like, I don't know how many iterations since then, but a bunch. And it was essentially like just a structured board. Like, this is the role you're in for the day. This is the role, this is the site manager. And then these are all the subsequent roles. So these are your tasks in that role. Those roles were assigned by who had the most certifications. So in our training program, he looked at that as, okay, well, that's fair. I get more certifications. I get more preferential roles. And eventually over time, doing also a lot of if then type training. So if a customer is upset, then I spend 3 minutes trying to fix it before I go get a manager, right? So if I can't fix it in 3 minutes, then I say I apologize to the customer, and then I go get a manager to help, right? So that built the muscle for him to work through a lot of issues and really build his customer service skills in a controlled way. So it wasn't like he was going to get stuck there for 20 minutes and like not know what to do, but it was, 3 minutes. That's enough time to figure out like, can I fix this or not? And honestly, 8, 9 times out of 10, he fixed it and built confidence because of that, right? So we built these rules and these systems, some of them being visual, some of them being like a if then type scenario, so and some being coaching. And eventually he got there. And it was awesome. So he gets to manager, and he's like feels amazing about it. And he does this role for maybe 6 months. And now he's ready for his next thing, right? He's just like, he has to keep growing, right? So he ended up getting a job as a supervisor at Home Depot, which he still works there today. I'm actually not sure what role he's at right now, but he's living independently a couple counties north of us now. I follow him on Instagram. He seems to be having a great old time living, a life that, I think he's proud of, which I'm really proud to be part of that.
Yeah. So, for those of you listening out there looking for great managers, you never know who might rise up from the ranks. They may have started out as an extreme user and need that extra clarity, which again, who doesn't? Some of us just need it more. But that deliberation of investment and clarifying, if I think you had written in that story as well, the first time he didn't pass for a manager, you realized you needed to make it more clear what the expectation was to become a manager. And you needed to write down on paper, oh, yeah, some of these intrinsic soft skill necessities for leadership aren't clear and aren't made explicit for learners that struggle with some of the nonverbal communication. So,
So yeah, he helped us build what we call our role guide now. So like every role from the entry level role through manager is spelled out with specific, hey, these are the hard skills and the soft skills that you need to learn and master before you get a promotion, right?
mhm,
So, and we try to break that down into like a lot of little roles. So people who like this young man, he really struggled to get there, right? So he needed checkpoints. If we went
yeah,
from associate to manager, he probably would have quit. So, okay, it's associate, then it's bay supervisor, then it's shift supervisor, then it's aftercare manager, then it's location manager, right? And
mhm,
up and up, right? So that it gave him enough waypoints with enough clarity eventually to to succeed. But this is also a framework that we continue to use today, right? So it was 2014 that we built that with him, and
yeah,
it's again, it's gone through more iterations. Maybe it's a little bit more colorful and well designed now, but it's the same concept. And so it's like, yeah, it was hard. And I think most managers in that moment would have just been like, get away from me, dude. This is way too much. You're doing way too much. But because we didn't, it helped us build some enduringly useful tools that an innumerable number of people who have benefited from it since.
yeah. Wow. So again, just that ROI, you invest in one. I mean, if that weren't enough already, like the one life that was changed and the one team that he led with you guys and then went on to lead at Home Depot, that's incredible. And then it multiplied. because you invested the time in that one, it benefits so many other developing leaders. And what company doesn't want leaders with that hard earned title? I mean, talk about a manager who probably loves their job because they worked so hard to get there. And that was the goal. And, I think we've all been to establishments where the managers aren't so happy to be there and they're put out by their extra responsibilities and long hours. But think about a guy like this who that was the dream and someone invested in him and he in turn invested in his company and in his team.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think I could ask you for 10 more stories but I guess the audience is just going to go have to read the book themselves. Tom, as we wrap up today, what's next for you personally for Rising Tide? I'll quickly mention Rising Tide U. I'm sorry, we didn't get much time to talk about that today, but quick shout out if you're a business leader looking to learn more of these practical frameworks and ways to develop your business with a mission similar to Rising Tide Car Wash. The dairies have that available. So yeah, there's that, but also what's next for you guys?
Yeah. So we're focused on continuing to build our car wash footprint here in South Florida. We're also very close to launching a franchise offering. So this model can be replicated in other markets. I think that's got my plate pretty full for the next few years. Rising Tide U, and I think of franchising as part of the Rising Tide U mission, which is we use the locations, our company stores, to build these practices, and then we use Rising Tide U to share them. So the book falls under that. We have an online course, an entrepreneurship course that falls under that, and then franchising will be the third product under Rising Tide U, because we really believe that in order to have the impact we want to have, we need other people to do it too.
Yeah. We've talked on this show already several times with guests about asking a lot of questions. And I think the dairies are some of the absolute best people to ask your questions directly if you get the chance, or even ask the questions and seek out the answers through these resources that Tom just mentioned. We all have assumptions that we make with the best of intentions. And sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And so looking to the ones who have gone before us, who are open about the assumptions they made and how Rising Tide Car Wash had to go back to the drawing board with a lot of these processes that they've worked on. And they call them prototypes and iterations, which I love because it means the work is never finished. You're always going to have new employees with new support needs, disability or not. And so they are truly a resource for any manager out there who wants to build a strong team and do it meaningfully. And, we were talking earlier about when we think about broadening your ability to recruit from a wider range of talent, I like to tell managers we're talking about widening your net and then telling you where to cast it to go fishing. Broaden your net because you're going to catch more talent that way. Who doesn't want that? And then here's a community that's ready to be put to work when supported well. We've shared this on the show before, but Special Olympics put out a study in 2024 saying individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities stay in their roles 50% longer than their non-disabled peers when supported well. And that's the piece I think we really need to hone in on as business leaders is how am I supporting my team members? Because the problem might not even be the disability. The problem might be we're just not leading in a way that can activate that talent and retain and support it and even promote it in some cases. So thank you for being a beacon of hope. Yes, Tom, absolutely. And just a practical guide who's really doing the hard work yourself and then teaching others how to do it along with you.
I appreciate that, Sarah. I think what you all are doing is amazing, and I'm glad to support in any way I can.
Well, one final question for you. We ask all of our guests, who is another business out there doing similar work in this very important field that you're a fan of and that you'd like to share the spotlight with today?
So I think Rajesh Anandan from Ultranauts is one of the best out there doing this type of work. He's been doing it actually similarly long as I have, and he's just a brilliant guy and done amazing work over the years through a lot of evolution. I would really check them out. I think they're great, and he's also started posting a lot on LinkedIn. So if you follow him on LinkedIn, you'll find some really nice content too.
Okay, we'll be sure to link that in the show notes today. We'll link, of course, all of your information and where you can find the book, where you can find Rising Tide U, and eventually stay in touch and you might be their next franchise, which would be so exciting.
There you go. That's right.
So yeah, Tom, thank you again for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on In Good Company. I hope this conversation gave you what you needed to take your next step. Special thanks to Georgia Tech's Institute for Leadership and Social Impact for the recording space and the coffee. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, share, or leave a review to help more leaders like you find us. Want more tools, frameworks, or a community of like-minded advocates? Head over to igcwithus.com to learn more. We'd love to connect. Until next time, keep building what wasn't there before. You're in good company.